Hi everyone. Detective Lefebre speaks. It started with a frustrated phone call from a legitimate homebuyer, a man named Jonathan Cooper. He had purchased a foreclosed property at a public auction only to arrive at the house to find new locks on the door and a notice that the property had already been sold to a company called Harbor Ridge Investments. The real estate agency overseeing the sale was equally baffled. Their records showed that the same property had been sold twice in a matter of days. The first sale, to Jonathan, was legitimate and backed by official documentation. The second sale, however, was highly suspect. Harbor Ridge Investments had presented paperwork that appeared genuine but bore inconsistencies, slightly altered signatures, questionable notarization, and missing procedural stamps. The agent overseeing the transaction raised concerns when attempts to contact Harbor Ridge Investments failed. The company's listed address turned out to be a rented mailbox, and the phone number led to a generic voicemail. Recognizing the hallmarks of a sophisticated scam, the agency reported the incident to law enforcement. The question was, how had someone bypassed multiple safeguards to pull off such a brazen scheme? Early investigations pointed to Sarah and Mark Reynolds, the supposed owners of Harbor Ridge Investments. On the surface, they were an unassuming couple. Sarah, 31, was a certified accountant who ran a small consulting firm. Mark, 35, had worked as a real estate agent before leaving the field to pursue entrepreneurial ventures. They lived in a modest suburban home and projected an air of normalcy with no outward signs of extravagant wealth. But digging deeper revealed a different story. Over the past year, Harbor Ridge Investments had been involved in a suspiciously high volume of property transactions, most of which involved foreclosed or abandoned homes. These transactions followed a pattern. Properties would be purchased for minimal amounts through falsified paperwork, then quickly resold to other companies at significantly inflated prices. Mark's expertise in real estate allowed the couple to identify vulnerable properties, ones caught in bureaucratic limbo or owned by individuals unlikely to scrutinize sudden transactions. Meanwhile, Sarah's skills in finance made her the architect of the scheme, forging loan documents and creating fake buyer identities to facilitate fraudulent transactions. Together, they exploited gaps in the system with alarming precision. The true brilliance of their operation lay in its complexity. Sarah and Mark had established a network of shell companies, each registered under different aliases and in multiple states. These companies acted as middlemen in the transactions, obscuring the couple's direct involvement. One shell company, Cedar Heights Holdings, was registered to an alias used by Mark. Another, Lighthouse Equity Solutions, was tied to Sarah but listed under an address linked to a co-working space she occasionally rented. These companies would buy properties from Harbor Ridge Investments, creating the illusion of legitimate market activity. When payments were made, they were funneled through these shell companies, often passing through multiple accounts before landing in offshore banks. The layering process made the money nearly impossible to trace without cooperation from international financial institutions. This complexity wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate strategy to exploit the fragmented oversight of real estate transactions. Local government offices, real estate agencies, and banks each operated within their silos, and Sarah and Mark's scheme exploited the lack of coordination between them. One of the most ingenious aspects of the scheme involved the creation of fake buyers. These buyers were often fabricated identities, complete with fake IDs, credit reports, and even employment histories. Sarah used stolen personal information from deceased individuals, many of whom had no immediate family to raise red flags. In one case, a buyer named Edward Cooper was used to purchase 3 properties in rapid succession. Edward Cooper, however, had died 5 years earlier. By using his identity, the couple avoided creating a paper trail that would lead back to them. For properties requiring financing, Sarah forged loan applications and bank statements to secure mortgages in the names of these fake buyers. Once the loans were approved, the properties would be resold to another of their shell companies at inflated prices, creating the illusion of market activity and pocketing the difference. This scheme relied on speed. The fraudulent transactions were completed within days, leaving little time for banks, agencies, or regulators to detect irregularities. By the time anyone noticed something was amiss, the money was already gone, buried in offshore accounts. Tracing the stolen funds revealed the extent of Sarah and Mark's planning. Once the fraudulent transactions were complete, the profits were routed through a complex series of accounts. Initial transfers often went through legitimate-sounding business accounts, such as Harbor Ridge Investments LLC, before being funneled to international banks in jurisdictions known for their financial secrecy. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Singapore were registered under yet more aliases. These accounts were meticulously layered, with funds often moved between them to obscure their origin. Transfers were carefully structured to avoid triggering suspicious activity reports, SARS, with amounts kept just below thresholds that might draw scrutiny. Sarah's background in accounting proved invaluable here. She understood anti-money laundering protocols and used that knowledge to design a system that exploited loopholes. For example, instead of transferring large sums at once, she broke the payments into smaller increments and staggered the transfers over weeks to avoid detection. The sophistication of this laundering operation made it nearly impossible for banks to identify the transactions as fraudulent. It also ensured that by the time authorities began investigating, much of the money had vanished into the murky world of international finance. The breakthrough came from a small but critical detail in one of the forged property deeds tied to Harbor Ridge Investments. The notary stamp used on the document matched one reported stolen months earlier from a law firm in another state. Cross-referencing records revealed that the stolen notary stamp had been used repeatedly in other suspicious property transactions. This clue pointed directly to Sarah and Mark Reynolds. Surveillance footage from a nearby office supply store showed Sarah purchasing notary supplies and copying documents. While this wasn't definitive proof of fraud, it provided a tangible link between the couple and the forged documents. Additionally, a deeper dive into their financial consulting firm revealed inconsistencies. While their business income appeared modest, large unexplained deposits, often just below the threshold that would trigger regulatory scrutiny, were regularly made to their personal accounts. These findings gave us the first glimpse of their scheme's financial backbone. To build a solid case, we needed to connect Sarah and Mark to the fraudulent transactions beyond circumstantial evidence. This required months of meticulous work. Investigators reconstructed their paper trail, examining property deeds, bank transfers, and communications tied to their shell companies. Key evidence came from whistleblower testimony. A former employee of Sarah and Mark's financial consulting firm, who had grown suspicious of their practices, provided internal emails and copies of forged documents. These emails detailed their involvement in creating fake buyer identities, coordinating property flips, and funneling money through offshore accounts. One email from Sarah to Mark read, "We'll need to use Lighthouse equity for this one. Too many transactions under Harbor Ridge already." The whistleblower also provided insight into the couple's dynamic. Sarah was described as the brains behind the operation, handling the finances and orchestrating the fraud, while Mark used his real estate expertise to scout properties and liaise with potential collaborators. With the evidence mounting, we placed Sarah and Mark under surveillance. This was no easy task, as the couple operated with remarkable caution. They used encrypted messaging apps for most of their communication and conducted sensitive discussions in person rather than over the phone or email. Despite their precautions, surveillance revealed several telling patterns. Mark frequently visited foreclosed properties and spent hours observing them from his car. Meanwhile, Sarah was seen entering courthouses and government offices, likely filing or retrieving property records to identify vulnerabilities in ownership. Investigators also observed Sarah visiting a co-working space tied to one of their shell companies. Inside, she printed documents, signed papers, and used a rented notary stamp to create fraudulent deeds. These activities were carefully documented, providing critical visual evidence to tie the couple to the crimes. To solidify the case, an undercover agent posed as the owner of a foreclosed property, claiming to be eager to sell. Sarah and Mark fell for the bait. During their first meeting, Mark assured the undercover agent that they could expedite the sale, claiming they had buyers lined up who paid in cash. Sarah followed up with a detailed plan to process the sale quickly, even offering to handle the paperwork. The couple's methods during the undercover operation mirrored those used in their previous scams. They forged the property deed, created a fake buyer, and routed the payment through one of their shell companies. This provided first-hand evidence of their fraudulent practices, as well as recordings of their conversations detailing how they bypassed traditional safeguards. With the undercover operation complete and the evidence in hand, we moved to arrest Sarah and Mark. The operation was timed to coincide with a meeting they believed was to finalize another property transaction. Instead, they were met by law enforcement. During the search of their home, investigators uncovered a treasure trove of incriminating materials. These included forged deeds, fake IDs, financial ledgers documenting their transactions, and correspondence with offshore banks. One ledger, written in Sarah's handwriting, detailed profits from each fraudulent property sale, along with notes like transferred to Cayman, via Cedar Heights and Flagged Lighthouse, use alternate account. The couple's reaction to their arrest was telling. Sarah maintained her composure, denying any wrongdoing and claiming the documents were part of legitimate business operations. Mark, however, was visibly shaken and quickly began blaming Sarah, saying, "She's the one who came up with all of this." In custody, Sarah and Mark were interrogated separately to exploit any differences in their stories. Mark cracked first. Under pressure, he admitted to his role in scouting foreclosed properties and coordinating with Sarah to falsify documents. "It was her idea from the start," he said, trying to shift the blame. "She knew how to make it all look legit." Mark provided details about their operation, confirming how they created shell companies, fabricated buyers, and manipulated property records. However, he downplayed his involvement, framing himself as an unwilling participant pressured by Sarah. "She said it was foolproof," he insisted. "I didn't think we'd get caught." Sarah, in contrast, remained defiant. She denied any wrongdoing, insisting that their transactions were legitimate and any irregularities were clerical errors or misunderstandings. However, confronted with the whistleblower's emails and the undercover recordings, her calm demeanor faltered. "This has all been blown out of proportion," she said. "We were just trying to make a living." Despite her initial denial, Sarah's handwritten financial ledger and surveillance footage tying her to forged documents were irrefutable. Eventually, she admitted to forging documents but claimed they only cut corners to streamline deals in a broken system. "The banks do worse every day," she argued. "Why are we the villains?" The couple faced an array of charges: conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and forgery. Prosecutors presented a devastating case, using the undercover operation, financial records, and the whistleblower's testimony to paint Sarah and Mark as cold, calculating criminals who exploited systemic loopholes for personal gain. Mark's defense team argued he was manipulated by Sarah, portraying him as a passive participant swept up in her schemes. Sarah's defense, meanwhile, claimed that the couple had simply taken advantage of gray areas in real estate law and should be fined, not imprisoned. They attempted to argue that the system's failures, not the couple's actions, were to blame. The prosecution dismantled these defenses with precision, highlighting the premeditation and complexity of the fraud. Evidence of the stolen notary stamp, fake buyer identities, and offshore accounts left no room for doubt. This wasn't cutting corners, the prosecutor argued in closing statements. This was a deliberate, calculated assault on the integrity of our financial system. After a 3-week trial, the jury found Sarah and Mark guilty on all counts. Mark was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, while Sarah, deemed the mastermind, received 15 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution, though recovering the full $2 million proved challenging. Tracing the stolen funds required cooperation from multiple financial institutions and international agencies. Some accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore were frozen, and approximately $1.3 million was recovered. However, the remaining funds had been dispersed across various offshore entities and could not be fully traced. The complexity of the couple's laundering network highlighted the difficulty of combating international financial crime. Efforts to recover additional funds continued for years, with limited success. For the victims, banks, property owners, and legitimate buyers, the financial and emotional toll of the fraud remained a painful legacy. The fraud left behind a trail of shattered trust. Real estate agencies and financial institutions tightened their procedures, implementing stricter verification processes for property transactions. Local governments also introduced reforms to improve oversight, such as mandatory electronic filing of deeds and enhanced training for notaries. The case also sparked broader conversations about the vulnerabilities in the real estate market. Seminars and training programs were launched to educate industry professionals about recognizing and preventing fraud, using the Reynolds case as a cautionary tale. For the community, the couple's unassuming lifestyle was a stark reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Sarah and Mark's neighbors, who had considered them kind and normal, struggled to reconcile the people they knew with the criminals they had become. This case was a testament to the lengths people will go to exploit weaknesses in the system. Sarah and Mark combined their expertise in real estate and finance to craft a scheme that was as sophisticated as it was damaging. Their downfall was a reminder that no matter how perfect a con may seem, small mistakes, like a stolen notary stamp, can unravel even the most intricate fraud. For me, the case reinforced the importance of persistence and collaboration. The sheer complexity of their operation required cooperation across law enforcement, financial institutions, and international agencies. Each piece of evidence, no matter how small, played a vital role in bringing them to justice. While justice was served, the case left lingering questions about how many similar schemes might still go undetected. It underscored the need for constant vigilance in a world where those with the knowledge and intent to manipulate systems will always look for the next opportunity. If you like this story and want to watch more stories by Detective Lefebre, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Remember, the truth is in details.